It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by AgileDad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. I recently did an episode on asking questions and the power of asking the right questions. And I thought to myself, that episode went really, really well. So why don't I put together another episode? And this is going to be the top 10 questions that we should be asking on Agile teams to help get to solutions. So, top 10 questions we should be asking. So, and these are questions that a product owner could ask or a scrum master could ask. These are just the top 10 questions that are going to help you accelerate what you're trying to do. So, let's start at the top. Sometimes when you are approaching a team and you're trying to find out about the scope of work, we tend to default to how long is that going to take? And what I can tell you is that's not the right question. So when I'm talking to individuals or teams, instead of asking how long is that going to take, I've got myself into the habit of asking, what is the size of that item? How big or small is the scope of that item? And when you ask that question, that gives you a little more answer about the size or the measurement that you should be using so that you can really get your head around, regardless of who's working on the item, if it's a really big item or a really small item. This way, if you have a star performer working on it, great, it's going to take less time. But if you have someone who's not a star performer, great, it's going to take a little longer. But at least we understand based on the scope of the item what's happening, so we can make sure we allocate the right mix of items into the sprint for the team. So, an interesting question. So, instead of how long it's going to take, how big or small is the scope of the item? Okay. The second question, here we go. How confident are you in your estimate? Now, this is interesting because I think sometimes we don't bother to ask about the level of confidence. And I've heard team members who really struggle with estimation and forecasting, and they just say something. It's medium, just to get past a question and move on. Right? It's medium. Let's move on. And what I can tell you is that's usually not the answer I'm looking for. I want to know with confidence that they feel like, hey, this is a good choice or this is the right thing. And it's really a powerful question to ask team members. How confident are you in your estimate? Do you really think it's large? Do you really think that's extra small? And what that's going to do is it's just going to make them refocus one more time and rethink. It's not that I'm doubting; it's more that I'm validating. All right, number three. What other options have you considered before making your final choice? Now, this is interesting because sometimes, as a product owner, I've had the opportunity where someone has insisted this is the absolute only way to do something. There's no other way to do this except for this way. It is, it's this way or it's not going to be done. And I think that when you corner them and say, that sounds like a great idea, but what are the other options you considered before making this decision? Just to make sure that they took the time to be thoughtful about what they're trying to do. They took the time to figure things out, and that the team has weighed out other options. That's not just an all or nothing, all in one direction. Okay, coming in at number four. What is the worst possible thing that could happen if we go in this direction? If you go in a specific direction, it is easy for you to get blinders. I know I've had this happen before. If I believe that I have the right answer, it's easy for me to go in one direction, blinders on, full speed ahead. And what I end up with is not what I thought, or not what I thought it would be. So sometimes we need to ask ourselves, and sometimes I've had the opposite happen too. I want to make sure I'm clear. Sometimes I've said, oh, we could, if we go in that direction, the whole world's going to fall apart. And then someone asked me, what's the worst thing that can happen if we go in that direction? And I'll sit and analyze it and say, it's not going to be that bad. Or I might say, life and limb is on the line. We could blow up the wrong thing, in which case you need to pivot and make adjustments. Okay. So next, number five, how are we going to measure success? How are we going to measure to make sure that we made the best decision? And I think that sometimes we don't take into consideration that we need to have actionable, measurable results. So, how we're going to measure is a real good way to make sure that people are focusing on how we're going to measure success. How are we going to measure the results. How are we going to measure that this is the best option? And what steps we're going to take to make sure that we got the right question answered. Okay, let's shift gears for a second and talk about meetings. Now, I've been in meetings before where I had all the right people and things went really smooth. I've also been in meetings where we're missing key players. So, one of the questions that I like to ask when we're planning an agenda or when I arrive at the meeting is, do we need everyone who's here now, or do we have everyone we need for the meeting? And I think that if you ask that question, it's going to give you a chance to revisit and make sure your target audience is there. It's going to give you a chance to revisit and make sure that you're not having people there that don't need to be there. It's going to help you save time, energy, and money. Okay. So I'm going to separate these two. I'm going to say, do we have everyone that we have here now? That's going to be number 6. And then, so it's everyone we need here. And then number 7 is, should anyone else be here? Because I think it is important to separate the two. Because sometimes you're looking for that stakeholder and they're just not available, or sometimes you thought you invited someone and they're not there. So I just want to make sure we have it clear that both are, important, that both are good questions. Okay. How about number 8? Number 8 is an interesting one. So when I'm talking about reporting, when I'm talking about acceptance criteria, when I'm talking about items getting completed, a lot of times I find myself asking, does anyone else need to be in a loop? Does anyone else need to know about this? And I think that sometimes when we ask ourselves, does anyone else need to know about this? Does anyone else need to be in the loop? It forces us to revisit and think about what we need to do in order to make sure everyone it needs to know knows. Now, I work a lot with the DoD, Department of Defense, and what I can tell you is that there's a big push in a secret and top secret in other communities about whether or not people need to know, and whether we're in the right environment to have the right discussions, or whether or not the right people are there. So I guess all those last few questions kind of focus around that being the topic, that being the sensitivity. One of my favorite questions is the last one that well, not the last one, but one of the last ones I'm going to ask. And it's, what do you know that I don't know? Now, sometimes I ask people this question and they look at me like I'm purple. I'm like, what do you know that I don't know? And sometimes the developer or sometimes the team member knows something that's just not in the scope of what I know. And it always impresses me when they come back and say, well, I know this. And I'm like, oh, wow, I didn't even think of that, right? Um, and sometimes we get good information from this, and other times it's just interesting banter. But I think that if it helps get something off of someone's chest, it is the most powerful question we can ask. And then here's the last one, and the last one is my trademark. The last one is one that I use probably more than all these other questions combined. Help me understand. You'll hear me say over and over, help me understand why you feel this way, or help me understand why this is the best solution. Help me understand where we're going to get the budget to do this. Help me understand why we should pull the product or project in this direction. Help me understand what tools or techniques we're going to use to make this successful. Help me understand what I missed here. Help me understand what direction the team's going to go. Help me understand is the most critical 3 words you can use in any agile coaching setting, period. Because help me understand is not saying no. Help me understand is not saying yes. Help me understand is not we'll see. Help me understand is, I'm interested, I'm invested, but there's more to this than meets the eye. Give me some additional information so that I can have confidence going forward. And I think that if you ask these 10 questions, you're going to see improved team performance. You're going to see improved team communication. You're going to have product owners that care, scrum masters that care. So I want to review these questions one more time. How big or small is the scope of the item? How confident are you in your estimate? What are the other options you consider before making this decision? What's the worst thing that could happen if we go in this direction? How are we going to measure success? Do we need everyone who's here in the meeting now? Should anyone else be here with us? Does anyone else need to know about what's happening today? What do you know about this product or project that I don't know? And help me understand whatever the relevant piece is. If you can get those 10 questions down, you're going to have a much better Agile implementation. That's going to do it for today. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you have a topic you want us to discuss, feel free to reach out to us at learnmore@agiledad.com. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Until next time, do take care.